Hey everyone, Panyo here. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of After Dinner Mints. I highly encourage everyone watching to join us in the Art Blocks Discord. A link to our Discord can be found in the description of this video. As always, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode of our weekly show. And now let's introduce our guest for this afternoon. We have generative artist, Matto.
Hello, nice to be here.
Thanks so much, Matto, for being here on After Dinner Mints. We have a ton to cover, and so yeah, I'd like to go ahead and get started. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. It's been quite the journey. I started out doing film, and I have an MFA in live action filmmaking with a focus on experimental animation. I taught for a while. I taught as a substitute teacher and then as a professor for many years. And I did a lot of photography and experimental films. And I did the tour, the film festival tour thing. So I had work that was exhibited all around, but didn't really feel like it was going to achieve my goals. So I kind of put a pin in my artistic endeavors with creating visual art, and I started writing. So while I was a professor, I did a lot of writing. I published a number of books on with haiku in them, so poetry books. I published some novels. And it wasn't until the last few years that I got back into creating, creative images.
Great. And who are some of the artists that you kind of looked up to and inspired your work early on?
Well, early on, I was most interested in avant-garde filmmaking, experimental animations. One of my favorite artists was Stan Brakhage. He would create the most sort of surreal and mind-bending sort of animations. He would take film negatives and scratch on them to remove certain layers of emulsions. And he would do all different kinds of experimental techniques to just create a different sort of story. And so it was very different from what I had experienced before then. And it just started opening my mind, and when I was in college, to just all the sort of different possibilities for telling stories with images. Also, an early avant-garde artist, Man Ray, experimented a lot with photography and doing direct-on film sort of images. He would take objects, place them on light-sensitive paper, and then turn on the enlarger to kind of expose an image directly onto the medium, but without a camera. So his sort of playfulness with the technology really inspired me. Later, there's also this man, Doc Edgerton, or Harold Eugene Edgerton. He, is kind of like this hidden figure. He was a scientist and engineer, but what he really did for the photographic medium was he really brought strobe photography into a new realm. And so he was taking these high-speed flashes that were used for industrial purposes and non-creative ends, but then using them in different ways. So we've probably seen pictures of a golf swing, but with a high-speed strobe, it freezes the individual pieces, and then it demonstrates the motion over time, but captured into a single image. He did a lot of fun stuff. Sound-triggered shutter releases. So here there's a bullet going through a card, and that was done by triggering the flash with the sound of, the gun firing. Also, early on, I'm interested in this earlier period where people were sort of experimenting and playing with these notions of what art should be. There was certainly Cubism. This is Picasso's Girl with a Mandolin. And really really interested and inspired by Cubism about displaying forms, in different ways that reveal more truth about them, but without trying to be super um, descriptive, if that makes any sense. An example of that might be Marcel Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase. What is the truth that's revealed in this? There's motion, there's these forms that might be seen, but how is it rendered into an image? And so a lot of my biggest influences are these, super old artists that were playing with, what art can be and how, we can change art to really um, demonstrate new ideas.
Great. And then how were you exposed to these different artists? Was it something where, maybe you were at an exhibit or a gallery or museum and you kind of saw their pieces and kind of studied them from there, or how did that come about?
No, I grew up in a very small town, and we had art galleries, in our city nearby, but it was really in college studying art history and just really getting into, um, just exploring things. So when I first went to school, I went to school for physics, actually. And, I didn't love what I was doing. And so I just started using the resources of the university. This was at Cornell. And I just started to really, I took a lot of different classes and tried to really get a grasp of like the different things going on in the art world. And what I was most interested in was this time period in the, early 1900s with all these avant-garde um, changes taking place. So it was really just, art history classes in college, but also once I discovered or was introduced to this time period, I got really excited about it.
Got it. Okay, I appreciate that. And I'm curious to know, obviously you're very active in Block Talk and Art Blocks, and I was curious to know, like, what is your introduction into the NFT crypto space? And when you first initially learned about it, was it something that initially clicked, or was it something that kind of took a little bit of time to understand?
Hmm. Well, I've been aware of crypto for a while because I was interested in technology and I was a teacher teaching technology related subjects. I was there when, Bitcoin was happening. And so I saw, and I watched how things were progressing. When, NFTs first came to get more attention, you could argue about when the first NFT was, but they certainly got more attention with CryptoPunks. I was very interested in how this technology could be used. And that's when I first started playing with Solidity, trying to, create contracts for my own art. At the time, I didn't have the skills or the resources, time to really educate myself and, dive deep into it. But I was always, always very excited about this possibility that the technology provided or could provide. Uh, when when creating NFTs was democratized by Rarible, that's when I got really excited. Before then, it seemed like it was kind of only for super nerds, right? And I say that lovingly. Super nerds who could write their own code, but that didn't feel like it was open enough. But once Rarible, created their shared contract and let anybody mint art, that's when I decided that this sort of new medium and this new practice, putting art into NFTs was something that I really wanted to get involved in. And then because of Rarible and my new attention, new focus into NFTs, I saw, Eric Calderon Snowfro tweeting about the squiggles and the launch of Art Blocks, and I was there. I think I joined Discord like a week later or something like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, so you were definitely like in the early days that I think a lot of people, sometimes kind of wish they were a part of, but everyone's a part of it right now. So that's super cool. So you were talking a little bit about, Rarible and how you were able to kind of explore maybe potentially launching pieces. Can we see some of those early generative art pieces that you created?
Yes, but also no. So the thing is, like when I was first, playing with the technology, I didn't put generative art pieces up there. I played with sort of experimental photography, experimental animations, and those kinds of things. I know that that's not really what you're looking for here, but what I do have is there's this piece, which is probably my oldest work that I've put into an NFT. I think this was actually a video backdrop that I made for a friend's show, like a music show in DC once when I lived there. And it's probably the oldest work that got turned into an NFT. And I put this on Maker's Place. It's not generative, but it does use, technology to create a new sort of story with the images. So I've always been interested in motion and time and how temporal media like video is experienced. So I made this. I do have a very early generative set though, and that's called Crystallized Illusions. Um, so these are also just like probably one of my oldest techniques that I had played with creating stills with, so an early generative technique. But I didn't actually mint these until after Ensō. Okay, so it's not technically my first NFTs, they're not technically the earliest work in NFTs, but it's a very early generative process that I developed that I then released as NFTs. I think it's a fun set. It's a set of just 99. The images are not the same pixel dimensions, they're different resolutions, and there's some depth to them. They're pretty interesting. It's three sets of 33 images, gray, black background, and there's some white background ones too.
And is that a
So
project
that's some of my oldest work.
is that a project you had been working on in the past, and then you kind of knew that, given the opportunity or the platform, that you might release it? Or is this something that, once you started learning about NFTs and the space, then you kind of started building out this project?
Well, my first creative medium, when I was 12 and 13 was photography. That's when I started, really creating visual images. I was programming back then too, but not visual stuff. So my first creative images that I was making were based in photography. And I developed this technique with photography, and I was playing with how, to abstract images. And so it was a very early technique, but I didn't really intend to make them NFTs until there was, the change when I realized how NFT sets and collections were appreciated. Before I was thinking just singular images, like this is an image, this is a piece of art. And growing up, and what what I had experienced, going through life was there's this piece of art, and that's the piece, right? It's that one piece that's on the wall there.
Mhm.
So having my mind open to sets, generative sets, then had me reapproach the technique, and then I reworked it and turned it into this project.
Great. And speaking of work, I'd love to talk about your first project on Art Blocks called Ensō. Yeah, do you mind telling us a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about the concept behind that project?
Certainly. All right, so Ensō is the goal was to see if I could replicate this very traditional practice of drawing a circle, but I wanted to do it with JavaScript, and that's why I started, playing with this project. So Ensō, the word, it means, well, it's a symbol, but it's always this circle that's traditionally drawn by hand. And the goal of doing it is to create it in like a simple motion, a fluid motion, one brush stroke, maybe two, and it's meant to just, you know, be a moment in time in life, right? So you draw an Ensō, you draw it, that's it. There's no corrections. There's no like fixing this, or well, that's the brush did something funny there. But it's just you draw it and that's it. So it has a long history with Buddhist practitioners, and it's a Buddhist symbol. Long history of just like practicing centering and just like being one with your activity. So that's kind of what Ensō means to me. Um, and I wanted to do it with JavaScript. I had programmed almost all my life, and I had used a number of different programs for different things. But I always put off JavaScript. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to learn it. So when I was learning JavaScript for art blocks, because when I got into the Discord, I was toying with a different project. I started learning JavaScript, and then I wanted to challenge myself with this. And I think it's perfect and beautiful that the first project is this piece, this Ensō.
Yeah, it has a very, you were talking about like Buddhist, but like very Zen-like feeling behind it. And I love the simplicity behind it. And, was the intention always to have kind of that circular brushstroke, or were you kind of toying around with other shapes?
Mm. Well, Ensō is specifically a circular form, so it was always going to be a circle.
Got it. And
They're
then,
not always complete, so
mhm,
sometimes you see, that they don't actually complete themselves. But it was always, going to be, I want to have the code create this circle in a painterly way, but still, it's still in the computer, right? In a painterly way that shows some organic aspects, and I want it to be imperfect.
I love it. And I think you executed it really well. And I do want to talk a little bit about and highlight the kind of the paper. Like if you zoom in a little bit,
Mm.
closely, you kind of has like that, paper texture to it, which I really, really enjoy. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? And was that something you always had in mind, or was that kind of like a late addition to the project?
No, that was I wanted to replicate a real life thing, and so when I thought about what this image would be on, it had to be paper. But how do you create a texture in JavaScript? You can certainly do things with like noise and doing some like tiny shadows to mimic the actual physical texture. Um, but I didn't want that texture to distract, and I wanted to, it's not paper, but I want it to be reminiscent of paper. And so what this is just a lot of lines, very, very curvy long lines that are drawn over the canvas a lot. I was inspired by what I saw in elevated deconstructions. There's something similar, but on a much smaller scale with very tiny lines. And I want to do something much bigger with more lines and with curves. And the result is that uh, these images have just thousands of lines that cut through them kind of randomly. And as those build up, that helps to mimic a paper-like texture. So it was always planned for the piece. Um, and some tokens have a stronger paper texture or this line texture than others. But I think it's just like life with reality with paper. Some has more texture than others.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit about the signature style.
Hmm.
It seems, yeah. So it has like the signature in the bottom right. How does the algorithm kind of decide the color of the signature?
So the algorithm first chooses the tone of the paper. And so it's a slight difference between different, like a green and a magenta paper. But on, some views you can see like this one's a little bit more green, this one's a little bit more magenta. There's yellow ones, bluish, greenish. There's a different color tone to the paper, and the signature stamp um, typically borrows that color. Now, these stamps in traditional work would be hand stamped in ink. So they would have a stone, they call it a chop, a stone seal chop, and they would, ink it and then press it onto the paper. So depending on the type of ink, the humidity, the pressure of the person, applying that stamp, there would be variation. Same stamp carved in stone, you know, possibly the same type of paper, but just different variations in how it's applied could result in different seals at the end. So, while this is the same hue, the seal to the paper, there are some that are lighter, and there are some that are darker.
And I'm curious to know how, I know you mentioned how it has kind of like this paper feel and obviously the brush stroke. And how does that translate into the art being displayed itself? Is this something you prefer it to be, printed digitally, or like, maybe on a digital screen, or potentially, like another method, or how do you go about that?
Hmm. It's a tough question because, you know, um, we're still early with digital screens. Um, but, there's this little anecdote when I was in Marfa for the Art Blocks open house. I was just like breezing through the crowd and I saw somebody with their phone and they had an Enzo on their phone as like the backdrop.
Uh,
And I was just like, hey, nice backdrop. And then I scooted away, and later they found me, and they were like, which it was great. It was so lovely. But the point is that what I want the most is for people to be able to enjoy it. So if it's on their phone, if it's printed out, just at some store, whatever, or on their TV, whatever they like. As long as people enjoy it, that's
mhm.
what means the most to me. Now, as if you ask me like the best way, um, I do offer prints, and I did carve a stone chop, and I do hand stamp these, and so I think that's the best way because that's the only official print that I offer from them. But honestly, if anybody just prints them out and sticks it on their desk, I'm super happy about that.
Very cool. And you do still offer those prints then? Is that something where people can reach out to you and still acquire
Mm-hmm.
one?
Sure. Yep.
Great.
Yep. In my Discord, I have a channel for it.
Okay, excellent. And were there any mints that kind of surprised you, or do you have any personal favorites that you can
Mm.
share with us?
You know, this isn't the one here. I'll pull up the image maybe. So this one has, it's a very wide brush, but a small circle, and it fades out. Okay, so I really like those because they're very different, and they're almost not Enzos in the traditional sense, just because it usually a person drawing an Enzo, if they're using a large brush like that, it would be a larger image that they would create. I'm not exactly sure the number here. I think it's either 2 or 3. Yeah, this one. I have this one in my house hanging up. It's I think it was my first mint in the project besides the artist mint. This is Enzo number 2. And it seems more like a comma or just like a mark than an Enzo to me. And so, I love them all, but I find that the ones that are just so imperfect to be quite fascinating. Others really like the ones that are really almost perfect, that are very dark all the way through, connect the lines. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm, for some reason, I'm just very drawn to the ones that are so imperfect, like this one.
Yeah, if you look in, like you can see those little hairs that are kind of sticking out to the side, not part of like the solid part, but kind of just like
Mm-hmm.
fraying off, which I really, really enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you talking a little bit about Enzo. I'd like to shift focus to your project focus.
Hmm.
That is another Zen inspired generative art project. Yeah, I'd love to know kind of the idea behind this project as well.
Focus is, it's meant to be a very long meditation on, you know, a lot of ideas that were floating around with me, and all these ideas, I was able to like distill them into this idea of focus. What is a focus? Well, in math, it's a center point. But what is a focus in, when you're talking about something like a subject? What's the focus of what you're saying? Like it's the thing that you're talking about. Or what's the focus in, visuals? It's like, well, when things are in focus as opposed to blurry or whatever. Um, And it's also like this point of attention, right? Like I'm focusing on something. And so there were all these ideas that were turned into this project. And it does play with Zen aesthetics, um, which is, there's many different types of aesthetics in any art form, right? But some that, I played with this were playing with perceptual space. A lot of Zen art sometimes has this sort of play with what is supposed to be the foreground, the background, or what is the space of the actual image. And that's one of the reasons why, let's see, I think I need to go live view. These are interactive so that people can play with the space themselves by using arrow keys and just exploring it. Also, with this idea of focus and, attention, directed attention, I wanted these pieces to be reproducible by hand. And so these don't use, the focus project doesn't use any randomness outside of the hash that's assigned at mint. So in Ensō, for example, there's the hash, and that determines all the traits. But there's a lot of random values that go into it. That is still like based on the hash, but it's the computer comes up with these values. So focus is different in that it doesn't use any computer-generated randomness. And so a person could take a printout of the focus algorithm, piece of paper and a ruler, and actually recreate it. So I found it fascinating, this idea of creating a piece that allowed people to explore it, but also, if they wanted to, spend time with it, challenge themselves, give them something to focus on. This word focus is all over the place, I know. But yeah, I really like this project. I'm really excited about it. It has so much different variability between mints. I can talk one more thing about another Zen aesthetic. Another one is doing less with more, is a Zen sort of idea in Zen art. So trying to create more of a story, more of a message, or more meaning for a person when looking at the piece than what's going into it. So like if it was a photograph of a valley, for example, there's so much detail there, right? And so that's using a lot of detail to tell a story. Part of the motivation here was to use as little as possible, but to create a very wide breadth of imagery. So doing the less part of this program, there's only 9 shapes, central shapes that occur in it, and there's only like 5 colors besides black and white, and those are consistent throughout the project. But because of perceptual interactions with human eye, they might seem like there are more colors. And so that was my attempt to do more with less, to limit myself to just a few shapes, to limit myself to a very small palette, but yet create something that, for example, this one has black, white, and blue. If I turn up a lot of the recursions, right, it can be very different looking, and the blue can actually look lighter now than the blue really is, versus when it's just loaded, the blue might have a different shade. And that's a perceptual thing that happens with our eyes when we see colors next to each other. But yeah, that's towards the goal of doing more with less.
I love it. And can you share with us? Not everyone knows, but you minted 0 in Marfa during our party last year. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? How you came up with the idea, and then where it was, and then kind of set the stage for people that haven't tuned in onto that part before.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was very excited to attend Marfa, and I was excited to launch this project. It just so happened that the Mint 0 was going to fall near the Marfa time. So once that sort of was the case where it could happen in Marfa, then I tried really hard to make sure it happened in Marfa, especially because, um, Marfa was the first time that I got to meet face to face a lot of the people that I'd been talking to for almost a year on art blocks. Um, and, over time, as more people joined art blocks, as there was more excitement, um, these people became my friends and like, almost family, right? And so it was extra important to me to try to share it if I could. And so there was an after party at a nearby, it was like a grain distillery, a distillery that used to be something else, but it had a bar. And I asked the bartender, I was like, "Hey, can I get over to that distillery area next door?" And they're like, "No, that's against health code." And I was like, "Please." Um, we were able to clear off the merch table in the back and set up, my laptop, and I was able to mint. And the scene was, let me paint the scene. The floors were squeaky. There was a lot of, a lot of people enjoying themselves and talking. And it was a very busy bar. A lot of the Art Blocks community, the after party from Art Blocks was at this place, and so it was packed. There were people hanging off of, everything. Um, but we found a spot that was a little bit quieter in the back, minted it, and then just walked around with the laptop and showed people. And when they started playing with the keys to play with the recursions and all that, it was just so great to be able to see these people that I respected and admired. Their faces light up with joy, just seeing like, oh, this is so cool. And I was like, I love that.
Yeah.
So it was really a wonderful experience, and I'll treasure that memory.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool because, like you said, I mean, you kind of just shared an experience where you're unsure what that Mint Zero is going to look like, and you
Mm-hmm.
just shared it with everyone. And I think there's something beautiful about that. That's the first time, like you said, also where a lot of us got together, a lot of us met for the first time, and it was just a shared experience. And I really appreciate you, doing that with the community. I think it's just something that, like you said, you'll cherish forever. And I think a lot of us will
Yeah.
kind of remember as we go to Marfa for this annual party year after year. So I'm
Thank you.
curious to know also about obviously the patterns and shapes in this project are a lot different than Ensō. Like, how did you go about deciding on those patterns and shapes for this project?
A lot of experimenting. Um, when I have an idea for a piece, I I just think about different options, and I don't actually touch a computer for a long time when I'm thinking about a new generative work. I knew that I wanted focus to be abstract. I wanted it to be completely abstract. Um, I wanted it to be set in geometry, and I wanted it to be able to, create these sort of perceptual illusions, right? And so for a while, I just thought of different things. I would walk around and I would try to see, like, okay, what if those lines were tighter? Or what if, this pattern overlapped that pattern? And so for a long time, it was just walking around and looking at things. And that's kind of how I do. I just walk around and look at things. Um, but once I had, this idea of a central shape, the background with all the recursions, and then some ideas for the background, then I got out my notebook and I started to write down what I thought were the trickier codes, the pieces of code. Um, Once I had what I felt like was a good basis for the tricky parts, then I went to the computer and then started to explore and play with it. So, I forget how many different background options there are, different patterns. But it was just a lot of exploration, a lot of trying new things, breaking things a number of times, and then just experimenting and seeing, what had nice results. I probably looked at 100,000 different renders of focus over the time. It was just it was a lot, but it was worth it. I'm really happy with the results.
And I asked this to a lot of artists that are on After Dinner Mints. How do you know when a project is complete? I feel like that's probably going to be
Mm.
probably one of the hardest things to figure out because you could spend you know years probably trying to, fine tune, so to speak, a project, but like, how do you, in your eyes, know that a project is finished?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a tough one. So at a certain point, things meet a level of quality that you like. You're like, okay, that's looking good, right? Um, Also, sometimes, you can be pleased with sort of mm, the variety. You can say, that's a nice variety, or well, I need to play with the probabilities a little bit more, maybe add or take away different options. Uh, you know, at some point, everything just kind of feels right. There's a couple funny, like, sort of sayings that I picked up, and one of them is referring to novels, and I used to write novels, and I probably will again, but right now I'm not. A novel is a really long piece of writing with something wrong in it, or wrong with it, right? And that's perfectly true. Like, what is a novel? It's a really long piece of prose with a problem, with at least a problem. And so there is no perfection. There is no, this is perfect. It cannot be improved. But at a certain point, you just have to let go. Um, Zen rock gardens where you are crafting sort of a landscape, but then nature takes over. Or Buddhist sand paintings, where so much attention and time would be put into creating a mandala, but then it'd be thrown away. It'd be just tilted and the sand would rush off. And so, there's this practice of um, letting go, but also being present in the creative process. And at some point, you just know. You just know that, like, oh, it's done. And I've practiced this over the years. I used to write a lot of poetry. I've slowed down a little bit with all the generative stuff, but I still write poetry. And sometimes when I feel like I need to write a poem, I just snap my fingers, and that's when I write the poem, and that's the poem, because it's supposed to be something that's present and just instant and not thought about too much. And I think that practice kind of um, lends itself into my generative art making practice. Now, I didn't snap my fingers and make this project, but at a certain point, I was just like, no, it's done. And then I knew it was done.
Great. I appreciate you sharing that. So the paper, line work, and pattern fill colors are a part of this project. How did you go about, selecting the palettes for this one, for focus?
It was tricky because I wanted colors that would have vibrations between them, and I wanted colors that would interact in different ways. So a blue that would get darker next to black and lighter next to white. So it had to be kind of a middle blue so that it could best do both of those things. But also like the blue to red in number 0, there's blue to gold. So it took a long time to pick just the right, in my opinion, shades of each of these colors. And I came up with these colors based on you know um, real life media. So the blue is supposed to be like a pen, like a ballpoint pen is a blue, and so the blue is inspired by that. The gold is inspired by a highlighter. Red is inspired by teachers' red pencils, which I used to be a teacher and I had a lot of red pencils, and so all these things were based. I knew the colors that I wanted to go with. I knew I wanted a green. The pink was actually a bit of a surprise when it happened. I saw the pink and I was blown away. And I was like, do they make pink highlighters? Yeah, they make pink highlighters. We're good. Um, and then like finding just the right pink, because I think that pinks and reds are really challenging to get a color that's not too abrasive, but still kind of soft. So it's and not muddy. It can easily go to brown and just like less vibrant. So pink is a dangerous but beautiful color. Um, but all the roots of the colors were inspired by real life media, like pens and pencils and things like that.
Great. I'm glad that you added the pink. Actually, I think that was actually a really nice touch.
Mm-hmm.
And
Thank you.
as far as another feature I'm curious about was this special feature, and I'm curious to know, like, what does that kind of represent
Hmm.
for this project focus?
So every piece has a trait special and then a value, right? Or like what is that trait? Um, Part of it was sort of a rebellion in a nice, polite, Matto way against rarity. Because I don't love hunting rarity so much. I think rarity is nice, but it's more about the visual result, or that's what interests me is the visual result more so than how rare it like something is. So part of it was just like, is it special? Yes, it's special. You know, like yes, is this token special? Does it have the special quality? Yes, it does. It's special. You know, so there was a little bit of a joke there. You know, like as a collector, yes, I appreciate rarity, but a little bit of a joke and rebellion there. Um, I can say that there has not been a token that does not have special yes. Okay, so maybe there will be a token that has something different there. I guess we'll find out.
Okay. All right. Well, that's something to keep an eye on. I appreciate you
Hmm.
sharing that. So on your website, you have a focus animator. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So on the website, there is a tool that allows automated interactivity with the token. And you know, the tokens themselves don't animate. You know, the tokens are static images that a user, a person, can interact with to change. The focus animator uses the token hash, you know, the randomly assigned or the random values that are assigned at mint, and it uses them in a certain way, in a predictable way, to create a series of key movements, so up, down, left, right. And so this animator uses the hash of the token itself to mimic if a person was sitting there with a piece of paper that went through the hash and said, okay, I'm going to go left, 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 right, 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 left, 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 right? So it's meant to be another sort of addition to what a person can do with focus, and also just like reiterating, like this is it's a piece that needs to be experienced. You know, just you know, a print of these are very cool. You know, if you can appreciate the minimalism in some of them, or the sort of visual effects that happen in some of them, but they are interactive. And so this automated interactivity was meant to just illustrate like, okay, this is interactive, you can do this, and the order of this animation, you know, how the focus tokens change with the interactive mode. It's still not random. It's still based entirely on the hash, and it's something that could be done manually. And I really wanted the piece to maintain that sort of tether to real life, that connection to the person that's experiencing the art. Because you could have art that nobody looks at, but what's the point? And so, you know, I really wanted it to always be connected to a person by the color palette names, you know, ballpoint blue, or the sort of ability to manually create it.
Great. And I'm interested to know, without talking about rarity, I know we touched base on that just a minute ago, but are there any mints that have kind of surprised you, or, things that, or some of the mints that, are preferably enjoyable by yourself?
Hmm. You know, I've seen so many mints from Focus. Um, and, you know, that there's no single mint that has been, um, I'll say, that has been so extraordinary that I've been like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? But however, what has happened is almost every mint is a new one. Um, and so, like, because I've seen, you know, so many thousands of these, you know, I've seen things like this happen. Okay, so here's, well, that one's got funny borders. And it still has funny borders. You know, so I've seen things like this mint happen. I'm looking at mint number 166, right? But I never saw this mint happen. Um, and so what's really special for me is like I get to see like, oh yeah, I know what's happening here, right? Um, and it's every mint is just like it's still surprising, but I know like just how variable the algorithm can be. I don't know. I'm not probably not answering your question well,
No, I
but
think you're just sharing that, there's so much variety here that, each one is unique. And this one
right.
specifically, I think is beautiful right here.
Yeah, we're looking at number 159. It has a sort of a central shape with no fill, so you can see through it, but it has a recursion on the central shape, so it diminishes in size as it approaches the center. But that with the pattern in the background and the tightness of it, creates this visual explosion with a vacuum in the middle almost, with these overlapping of shapes. There's circles and then there's an empty square in the center, and so like this is. I think it's beautiful. All these different pieces can be so minimal or so have so much going on, but at the same time, like I'm just blown away by the project. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Like there hasn't been a single piece that's blown my mind, but overall, the project I think is lovely.
Very
I'll say
cool.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we move on to talking to you about a collector, is there anything else you wanted to add on about the Focus project?
Uh, Only that it's very variable in the outputs. Um, a lot of times, the more busy outputs, get seen as desirable. But here we've got, if we're looking at number 168, this is a very, very simple output. There's two squares, well, three if you count the background, and then like, I don't know, how many lines we have there? Seven? So it's three squares and seven lines, and so it's a very minimal piece. And so one worry I had going into the project was letting down collectors if they minted and if they were not sort of interested in minimal art. I was worried that they'd be upset by it. But it's part of the project. I decided to leave my comfort zone there and possibly allow a minter to not have their perfect outcome. It's part of the project. Um, but because of the interactivity, they could always play with it. They could make it how they like it. And, you know, going back to the discussion of Ensō and the best way to present it, same idea with focus. I want people to be able to enjoy it. So if they like a more minimal piece and they got one that's busy, they can certainly, use the interactivity to pare it down to where it's just a shape and a couple lines, and then print that or save that as an image and use that however they like. It's really important for me to give collectors and people that are looking at the art the ability to enjoy it. So I hope that everyone likes focus. If they get a minimal piece, I hope they appreciate the minimalism in it. And if they don't, you can sell it. Somebody else will buy
Yeah,
it.
absolutely. And I think what's really cool about this also is that it would actually be really nice to see this being displayed where it shows more of the simplistic, piece, and then maybe like you interact with it a couple times and then show
Hmm.
the progression over time and how complex it can see, as you interact with it more and more. So, yeah, beautiful project, Matto, and I really appreciate you talking
Thank
about
you.
that. So
Thank
I
you.
do want to talk to you about you being a collector. I think
Mm.
you're one of the
Hmm.
best collectors in the art block
Mm.
space. And yeah, first off, I just want to talk to you. How do you go about collecting art?
Well, I was lucky to be in there early, you know, and when I approached a project and thought about collecting it, I was mostly interested in just the visual appeal of it. So how do I go about, collecting art? First I have to like the project. Um, I'll tell everybody a secret. Um, that this whole like, how do I approach collecting art? I do not have a CryptoPunk. I saw CryptoPunks. I saw them get minted. I saw them when they were worth, or when their price was like point 0.1 and 1. But I don't have one because I didn't really like the art. And so, sure, seeing now the value, I can, be like, well, if I did buy them, they would have appreciated in value and it would have been a good investment. No argument there. But as far as my art collecting, I really have to connect with the piece. And so a lot of the, like hopefully all the pieces in my collection, I have a very strong connection with. I do like to mint more than I like to buy on secondary. I like to do that because, kind of like this, my motivation of just being present, of letting things happen. That part of the minting process is really nice like that, right? Like I don't know what I'm going to get. Maybe I can find new appreciation for a piece by minting it, by seeing just what is given to me. So I definitely prefer minting over buying on secondary. And I also like to mint because it feels like I'm contributing more to the artist. Nothing against collectors or anything like that, but I really, I'm an artist. I've been an artist and I've struggled in the past. And so it feels really good to be able to give something back and to help an artist in their career. So that's one reason why I like to mint more than buy. But I've just been able to, collect over time, and hopefully I've been strategic with timing of buying things on secondary, trying to, buy when the market is down so I can get a little bit more value. And it's important for me to always sort of, to buy art that I love at a price I can afford. And a perfect example of this is meridians. I love meridians. I love them. They're gorgeous. But I set a budget. The mint did not drop to that budget. Prices on secondary did not drop to, the budget I had set. And I don't have a meridian. I would love one. They're beautiful. But it was just not something I was comfortable with. So, I try to maintain sort of a level approach to art collecting. And once I buy something, I don't plan to sell it. So all the, the investment that I make, I do think really hard about what the budget should be for me, and what I'm comfortable with basically locking up. Because like I said, if I buy something, it's not going to be sold, not lightly.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I appreciate you sharing all that. Do you have an online gallery that you'd be willing to, share with
I
us and talk
certainly
to us
do.
about?
Yeah, so deca.art/matto/generative variety. I think maybe it's just generative varieties. Okay, so if you go to deca.art/matto, you'll see, some galleries. Right now there's just one because I'm just exploring Deca, but it's called Generative Varieties. With this gallery, I am showing, again, trying to illustrate just a variety and breadth of art that can be created with similar techniques or similar ideas. I don't want to say that that an artist used the same kind of techniques as another artist. The end results are similar in my groupings here, and so I'll say that they had similar ideas or similar ideas they wanted to present. So in this gallery here, I have different section names. So this first one is called Dimensional Divisions and Projections. And we've got Frederik van Hout. I hope I pronounced that right. Archetypes. We've got plasticity. We've got democracy. And then we have a cubeverse, which is based on the MIT licensed software of Frederik van Hout up here. But all these are, sort of taking a shape or a grid. All these are presenting it isometrically, I think is the term, at an angle. And then projecting it and dividing it. Some do, some are just stills, Archetyped is a still. Cubeverse is actually animated. Um, Democracy, of course, is interactive with clouds and crazy weather patterns and things like that. But they're all from the same sort of idea, to me anyway. Have a similar idea. So a lot of the artwork in here is art blocks based. A lot of it is also Tezos based, and there's a little bit of non-art blocks Ethereum work, but the majority is definitely art blocks and Tezos. Do you have anything specific that you'd like me to talk about, or should I just go through a little bit?
Yeah, if you just
What do
want
you
to go
think?
through, and then maybe I'm curious to know, do you research about the artist a little bit before you collect something also, or is that
Hmm.
like a factor at all when you collect?
So, for example, Cosmodesius, right? It was an Art Blocks factory drop. I had never heard of the artist before, my own failing, I'm sure. And but I loved the piece. I loved how they drew themselves in. I loved the sort of alien nature to them, and so I loved everything about it. And the fact that I hadn't you know been aware of the artist before did not really factor in. Um, Schwembelder, with his various works, I am a huge Schwembelder fan. Um, and so he's kind of the obvious, difference here. Like, I know Schwembelder, he makes something, I want it, right?
Yeah.
Um, but this artist that did Heat Death, I just was introduced to them, and they created this piece, and it's a beautiful piece. You have to check it out. I think the artist name is Lunaire, something like that. I can't remember the artist right now, but it's a beautiful work, right? And this is an FX hash piece. Um, and I just love finding new artists and seeing like their different perspectives. Lava Glow, I believe by JavaScript. Is that right?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yep, and it's like
Okay.
kind of an animated flowing
Yeah.
piece. I love that.
Mm-hmm. So these were all sort of using spheres as the idea. I have another section using strange attractors. It's this sort of, um, I'm not as educated on what strange attractors actually are, but my understanding is, the ways that things attract and, create patterns with each other. And so all of these pieces are, using that sort of idea of how particles or lines can be drawn just by, tracing some mathematical phenomena. But they're very different in the end result.
Mhm.
And that was part of the goal with the gallery, is to just show, you know, that even though these can be grouped in a certain way, they're all um, strange attractors or they're all using spheres, the end result can be very different based on the artist's interpretation and the goal. So in this next section called organic code, these are both drawn with circles, right? But they're extremely different sort of end results. We have apex, okay, an art blocks drop, where circles of diminishing scale draw themselves and layer themselves into an ethereal scene. Or corals, which has a very, this was a piece on Tezos. It has a very different feel. It might be reminiscent of Octogarden from Art Blocks.
Mhm.
But it's the same thing. It's circles on top of each other, just like Apex, except the way that the circles move and the overall image that's created is very different, even though both of those are circles drawn on top of each other.
Mhm.
Continuing this, in this organic code, memories of Keelin, lovely, beautiful project. And this, I think, is called Dancing Souls, which is a live piece on Tezos where when you click, it creates a new image. But it's just this organic flow that I thought paired well with Keelin, memories of Keelin, where you're getting some texture in both. You definitely have a more representable pattern in memories of Keelin, But here in the Dancing Souls, you still have sort of these light waves, making you think like it's underwater. And so both of these are organic. You know, the images that are created look very organic, but of course, created with code. I have a section on representational subject. So when using code to make something that is specifically like a subject or an object. Okay, so we've got sea dragons, a lovely little seahorse critter over here, and then through the window, nice serene little snow falling on a tree. Really nice.
And I'm curious to know, do you kind of think about set building, when you're collecting at all? Or, I know some people, collect where they're like, all right, this one, obviously D. Bachman, infamous about like black and white, being like, all right, I'm kind of collecting. They kind of have like an idea maybe they pick up, and then they're like, all right, this is kind of like the path I'm going. Do you have like that similar kind of style when you kind of collect, or is it kind of just, case by case, every single project's a little bit different?
It's a little different, but I certainly do have in mind pieces that I may want to pair with or match with. The plasticity that I showed earlier next to the archetype, I picked the plasticity because of the colors and the color similarities to the archetype piece that I had. So it definitely plays in, like my set building plays into what I'm collecting. But moreover, because I do prefer mints, moreover, I just let happen what happen. If there's something that I think is a good value from an artist that I haven't collected before, even if it wouldn't fit well in the overall collection that I'm building, I'm happy to buy that and add it because, not only do I get, to explore a new artist's creativity, I also add variety that maybe that piece will be paired well with the next one I see or something I see next month. It's a
Great.
little bit of both.
Okay. Yeah, and maybe if you have like a couple more pieces, I just want to kind of keep an eye on time.
Yeah, certainly. Let's see. Um, you know, uh, I love cellular automata. They're the only sort of, I don't want to say technique, but like everything else is kind of a nebulous idea, right? Like spheres or organic. But cellular automata is a very specific sort of type of math and animation that is a result. It's like a predictable math rule that creates other things. So I have a nice, what I think is a nice cellular automata collection. We've got Ixnay OK with Zoologic. I'm a huge fan of that project. I'm also a big fan of on-chain art, so completely on-chain arts. There's a project called Grid. I think the collection is actually called like CAIC, like Cellular Automata in Chain or something like that. But you can follow links and stuff. But some of my favorite pieces have to be, if I get to them, these meditative pieces. Ooh, photorealistic pieces, sculpture. I love sculpture. My background as a photographer, my background as a technologist and a coder. Sculpture just blows me away. But meditative pieces, I absolutely adore. Rituals Venice. I have what I think is a very nice Rituals of Venice collection. I think I've got like 10 pieces. Very, very happy with it. And I just love both the idea and the experience of enjoying the pieces.
Great. Well, Matt, I really appreciate you talking about your collection. You have quite the extensive collection, and I always look forward to seeing whatever you collect on Art Blocks or Tezos, wherever. I think it's super fun to just see what you're collecting for your vault.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving forward, I would love to talk, just briefly on, what do you do in your spare time when you aren't coding a project? What do you do for fun? Is that, I know coders can definitely be like ingrained in like certain projects for, a considerable amount of time. So just, curious to know what you do outside of that space.
Outside of coding, I spend a lot of time outside. I actually wanted to do this interview outside in my yard, but the birds are just so loud. It was like a jungle. But I love gardening. I love doing things with my hands, like building. I love building things, and those sort of tasks, those kind of solitary, quiet tasks. That's where I can be creative. That's where I can let my mind wander and think about like this piece or this project I've got going on or this one. And so like I love doing things just like I said, gardening or building something because in the background while I'm doing a sort of otherwise maybe mundane sort of task, I can just think creatively and brainstorm about things. So I spend a lot of time outside, spend a lot of time with my partners, uh, just trying to be as present as I can.
Great. And this next question kind of goes in line with, your projects being more Zen like. I'm curious to know, like, mental health, I feel like is such an important part of the space. Like, how do you wind down once a project is fully minted, or maybe like even during the process of coding a project?
Mhm. Uh, yeah, great question. I don't really know what wind down is personally, just because I'm always doing stuff and I love being active and I just love always doing things. But what's really important to me is being able to find time to center. Okay, so even if I'm like doing a lot of stuff and like running around, I always make sure that I have time to just breathe or just sit and just find a few minutes at minimum just to find my center and just be at peace with whatever is happening around me. And, what's most important, I think, for other people thinking about, mental health is that they find something that helps them find their center, find, you know, something that brings them, into an awareness of themselves. So it could be doing different sports or different fun things, could be different styles of meditation, whatever it is. It's very important to me that I find just a couple minutes a day at minimum to just be at peace and restful. And I think it's really important for others to also have that because, especially in crypto, things move so fast and things can get so overwhelming and there's a lot of money tied into these things, right? Like, oh, did you get this piece and did it appreciate and the prices are going down and all this stuff can be, create so much anxiety. But whatever works for people so that they can just take a step back, you know um, revisit what's really important to them, that's what they need to do. So I don't have any specific thing because it's going to be different for everybody, but it's really important that everybody does try to do that, in
Absolutely.
my
Yeah,
opinion.
that's great advice. And finally, how can people reach you? Should they have any questions? I know you have a website. Maybe you can plug that. Any social media that you want to add to anyone that's listening in.
Sure, sure. So I do have a website, matto.xyz. Um, it needs updating, Websites always are the last things to update. And I'm on Twitter. My username on Twitter is monkmatto. Um, but yeah, I'm on Discord a lot. I have a Discord channel that's linked from my website or a Discord server. But yeah, I'm quite available to chat. If anything's going on, you want to talk about my pieces, want to talk about life, just find me, grab me, and I always try to respond pleasantly, even when I think it's a scam. I'm very skeptical in general, but even if someone is, just saying, "Hey," I'll respond like, "Hi," because I think it's really important to be able to connect with people. So
Yeah.
yes, please try to connect with me.
Great. Well, Matt, I really, really appreciate you being on After Dinner Mints. It's been such a great conversation learning about your projects and then learning about you as a collector. So, yeah, really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Absolutely. On next week's show, which is a pre recorded After Dinner Mints show, which will be released on June the 29th, we have art collector Dirtis. Finally, we have a newsletter that's weekly. It gets delivered via email and has information on upcoming drops, generative art related news, and you can find a link to the newsletter in the description of this YouTube video. Again, I want to thank Matto for joining me on After Dinner Mints. As always, make sure you comment, like, and subscribe to the Art Blocks YouTube channel. Be kind to each other, buy what you love, and we will see you all next week. Thanks a lot, Matto. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good day.